Welcome to Tech Talent Today, where IT leaders share their tough challenges, creative solutions, and latest insights. You'll discover fresh ideas and inspiration here with your host, IT staffing veteran and president of Claremont Technologies, Jodi Kulik-Mayer. And now, here's Jodi.
Today, I'm excited to be joined by Maryanne Spatola. Maryanne is the CEO and founder of C3 Talent Strategies. She's an award-winning human resources executive with extensive experience in the human capital arena, including talent management, executive coaching, strategy, leadership, and organizational development. Today, she's at the forefront of rapidly evolving workplace trends and founded Leadership Incubator as a way to help leaders and organizations more quickly apply timely and innovative solutions for sustainable results in the new world of work. Maryanne is an assistant adjunct professor in the Human Capital Management Graduate Program at New York University. She enjoys getting on her soapbox about the future of work and the need to transform organizations and leadership to align with the new realities. Maryanne is the author of the recently released book, The Office is Dead, Now What? A Post-Pandemic Field Guide for Leadership. Welcome, Maryanne. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Jodi. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Me too. So we were introduced by a mutual friend, Gary Boumet, who was also a guest on Tech Talent Today.
Love him.
He's
Gary
wonderful.
and I he's wonderful. We have both a professional and a personal relationship. We worked together at a company. He was one of the IT leaders I always admired, and he has a fabulous band. And he lived in a town near but where we used to live, so we used to stalk him all the time and go listen to his band play. And he's a great guy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm so thrilled he introduced us because he turned me on to your book, The Office is Dead, Now What? A Post-Pandemic Field Guide for Leadership. So what prompted you to write the book?
It goes back a number of years. I am an adjunct professor at NYU in the HR graduate school. And like 2015 or 16, my academic director asked me to create a new course called The Future of HR. And it was all around innovation and what was happening in the market. And we knew the future of work has been here for a while, right? It's not new. But trying to get people to come along. And my passion, even in my own business, is around aligning talent and strategy, right? So that's business strategy and HR leaders. How do you get them all on the same page? So I wrote that course, been teaching it for a number of years. It's my signature course at NYU. It's what I do in my business. And then the pandemic hit. And so, you think about a course on the future of HR, I think I've rewritten it 5 or 6 times in the last 3 years because everything keeps changing and evolving. And what started to happen was these CEOs, I think David Solomon from Goldman Sachs was one of the first CEOs to say, okay, everybody back in the office. And I just had this chill run up my back. Like, what are you talking about? We're not just going to throw away everything we learned and go back to the way it was. What a tragedy that would be. And so that's what kind of inspired me. And I started talking to leaders about, how did you get through the pandemic? What are the lessons you want to bring forward in a post-pandemic world? And it really started to shape up. And a couple people suggested, you should write a book about that. And I'm like, you know what? That would really be a great thing to bring to the world, right? Help leaders understand what other leaders were doing to make their way through the pandemic. And I chose the field guide format, writing it from the lens of a coach. My core, I'm a coach and a teacher, because there is no one answer, right? We're still very much in this pandemic mode of there's no playbook. And every organization has to do what's right for their culture, for their workforce, for their company, and figure that out. And so that's what my book is intended to help them do.
Wonderful. There's no one size fits all. So I think it's great to share the stories and the experiences so you can take what you need from the book.
Right.
So when we were talking beforehand, you mentioned that it's, a polarized workplace, in person versus remote. So What are you like seeing and hearing in the marketplace?
Oh my gosh, it's what we're reading all over the place. And ironically, right, interesting timing, a colleague of mine tagged me in a post on LinkedIn just this past week that the algorithms on LinkedIn resurfaced an article I wrote, you ready, Jody? 2 years ago. And it was
Wow.
entitled Closing the Chasm on RTO, Return to Office. And what I talked about was how challenging this will be for our executives and our leaders to figure this out. And here we are. And it was like almost eerie that that would come back up. And I guess what that said to me is this is still a hot topic. What we're noticing
Right.
in organizations, right? You see this 100% pull to in person. You see the workforce saying not so fast. And so
Right.
that's the polarization. And where the organizations who are being successful are the ones that can say, I have a yes and solution, not an either or solution, right? We're going to break that polarity and figure out what is a happy medium, what works for both sides that can get us to a better place and move forward, right? And, that's to say, the office is still there, right? Like my book says, the office is dead. And what we really mean by that is the office as we knew it no longer exists, right? The
Right.
expectations
Like
have changed. The way in which we get work done has changed. And so you have to adapt for that instead of trying to throw it out. And that's what we're seeing in the market. So the companies that are figuring out yes and solutions are having greater success and coming to the realization hybrid's here to stay. It's not going to go away.
right. There's always people that fight change, right? Whenever there's like a technological change, there are people who
Yeah.
resist it and want to pull back to the old way, but somehow you just can't fight change. It still moves forward. They could slow it down, but eventually it comes to be.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of like a yes and that like is working for a company?
Oh, yeah. One I talk about in the book is Lego. So Lego has their headquarters in Denmark, about 2,000 employees in that location. And what they did was redesign their office space to model WeWork, right? So what they've created is an office space where people can come in and have a private, phone booth kind of thing to work in, but it's private, it's quiet. I can do my work and get things done. They've created huddle rooms for small teams to gather. They have large spaces if they want to do a town hall or things like that. So they have this kind of mixed bag of ways to work. And instead of mandating it, what they're doing is inviting their employees to come in to use the space in a way that makes sense for them, right? What we know is there's still magic in having people in person. Nobody's trying to discount that. And we know there are jobs and professions, industries that will never be remote, right? Manufacturing, healthcare. You have to be in person, right? Although it's been technology enabled, but there are still a lot of jobs, industries, professions that will require in person. So we're not saying you can't ever do it again, but we're encouraging companies to figure out is answering the question why we gather, for what purpose. And when you can give them a logical reason and something that makes sense and that's inviting to them, they will come. People get excited about, wow, I haven't seen my coworkers in 2 years. I want to come together and do that. Or we have a new client kickoff. So we're all going to come together and strategize and partner up and figure out how that works. And then we can manage, a kind of hybrid situation. But that's Lego was one that I profiled. What's interesting too is, we're watching in the media companies like Apple, Twitter, Disney, Amazon, all started with this hard line, everybody back, right? And the workforce is still retrenching. And Amazon workers put up a petition, so did Disney employees. So they're just not going back that easily. They're not ready to give up the fight, which that makes my heart feel good, right? That we found new ways to work that give us better work life harmony. We don't have to have a 2-hour commute to sit next to somebody that's doing the same thing I'm doing. We're not even talking to each other. Like, what's the purpose of that?
Right. Some work is probably better done like alone and quiet, and you could do that at home or for wherever you're working. And right, some you need to collaborate, just like you said. What
That's
is the
right.
purpose? So,
That's
what do
right.
you think
And,
about companies? Yeah,
no, go
that
ahead.
are. What do you think about companies that are mandating like 3 days in the office, and they pick like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever days in the office? Are people commenting on that?
Yeah, if it works for that organization and the workforce understands why we're doing that and for what purpose, it absolutely makes sense. I think people do want to come back to a place where they can have that social interaction. People miss their coworkers. There's no question about that. But it's the way in which we go about doing it. Because the other interesting thing about the Lego example is their leadership didn't mandate anything. And it was kind of the unspoken hidden gem in the way they approached it because they didn't force people into it. They created spaces that were inviting. And basically, in their messaging, what they said was, we'd love to see you 2 to 3 days a week. We want to know how you're doing. We want you to be, engaged with your coworkers. And they want to create that sticky culture. But as opposed to some of these other companies that are now doing badge swipes to make sure you're actually there, or they're going to tie your pay to attendance, right? Think about what culture that creates now. So now you're going to have a fear based culture. People are going to worry about losing their jobs if they're unable or unwilling to actually show up in an office. I mean, what is that going to do to innovation and collaboration? People come to work fearful? We're going the wrong
Right.
way.
Yeah. That does not seem like a good culture. And it
Mm-mm.
doesn't seem like an attraction culture where you can get new employees. And maybe if you want like the cream of the crop, you're probably not attracting them.
They're not going to
Just
come.
people who said they need a job. Right. Right.
That's right. They're
Um,
not going to come.
you know, you also talked to me about, like creating connection and right. It's difficult in the remote portion. So like what are people saying about how to create connection when you're not together, because some companies are still fully remote.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And some companies have always been fully remote. GitLab
True.
is probably the largest global organization that was built that way and continues to be that way, fully remote, and they operate worldwide. So they figured it out. They actually have a whole vertical service market to help companies figure it out. Um, but I think to answer your
Wow.
question, ways to create stickiness again comes back to what works, right? Like some things will always be better in person. But what we've discovered is there are ways to make it work in the virtual setting. So coaching, I think, is a great example, right? We saw for years, I've been an executive coach, oh my gosh, probably 20 plus years. Back in the day, our version of remote coaching was on the phone, right? We would call clients because they
Right.
couldn't, right? We couldn't meet them in person. So we'd call clients and that was remote. So it worked. But what we discovered in the pandemic was some of the benefit to being in a virtual setting was you had even more confidentiality around you. So whereas in an office setting, if we're meeting in person, well, who knows my coach is here today? And what are they, they're wondering about what we're talking about, that kind of stuff. Or, the feeling of letting your guard down a little bit more because it's just these four walls in a much different way. So I think leadership and coaching combined were two things that we decided we could do. I did tons of team events. We did lots of virtual workshops in the pandemic. So we proved it can work. Now, what happens when we go back? Are there still opportunities to do that? Sure. We're going to have remote based employees. We want to continue to keep them engaged and do that. And then there will be opportunities to gather. And where I've seen a lot of success, one of my clients is actually preparing their June It's called Business Leadership Group, 40 of their top leaders in the company. Um, but they want to come together for, one of the main reasons is they've got some new members who've never seen each other, right? So they
Right.
want that opportunity to do that. But the work that they're doing can also be done virtually for those who either can't be there, right? It's a great option when you can't be in person for whatever reason, or you want to run it differently to have a different reach.
And what type of team events do you think work well fully remote?
Yeah, we've done some really fun ones. There's a startup company that I work with, and they were trying to figure out how to scale and grow. And for them in particular, they're a remote company. So they're not in person by design, never have been. And so running their team sessions virtually makes a whole lot of sense. I like to do it in a way where we still have a lot of activities. We use breakout rooms, whiteboards, fun ways to keep it moving and engaging, and then giving them enough breaks so that they can move. But one of the most impactful workshops we did was all around how do we scale? How do we make our processes trainable, repeatable, sustainable over time? And we did a really fun bingo exercise around values, how to create values. So it works. There's no question that it works.
Right. And how do you think like leadership has changed with this changing
Mm,
dynamic? You said to me, leaders can't manage by walking around anymore.
yeah, that went extinct in the pandemic, right? We couldn't walk from
Right.
somebody's house to somebody's house. But I
Right.
think what's happening, and I think this is actually one of the biggest struggles, Jody, that you just hit on, is we really can't do that anymore. And I think that's a big part of this retraction is this fear-based mentality. If I can't see you, I don't know you're working. And it's such a logical fallacy because the truth is, even if they're sitting right in front of you, you don't know they're working unless you're standing over their shoulder all day. And
Right.
the biggest ripple in trust, erosion of trust that's happened because for the last 3 years, what have we told employees? You're doing a great job. Thanks for keeping the business running during the pandemic, right? And I have tons of articles in the book that were studies that were done on productivity boosts during the pandemic, right? People gave up commutes and worked extra hours. And they're still willing to do that, not to have a commute. Um, and so leaders are really struggling with how do I manage results over methods? How do I get comfortable with giving agency to my employees over how, when, and where they get their work done? That's a big challenge for leaders. They're not accustomed to doing that.
Right. That makes sense. So you interviewed 28 leaders from all over the world
Okay.
for your book. So what were some of the lessons learned?
It was really fascinating. So, when we first started out, my approach to the interviews was just to ask open ended questions that had no assumptions, that were unfiltered, because I just wanted to hear from them. What leadership practices were you using during the pandemic that helped you find your way through it? And what was one leadership lesson they wanted to bring forward? And that was a very small question set. I just wanted to open the conversation. And I will tell you, by the time I got a third of the way through the interviews, the answers started to be all the same. And so that's what emerged as these 5 leadership practices, because by the time, like I said, by the time we got a third of the way through the interviews, I could almost predict what they were going to say. And that's what really shaped these 5 leadership practices. So empathy is your superpower, right? We had front row access to all the challenges our employees were facing, probably for the first time, right? Who's managing a little one in the same room while they're trying to get their work done? Who has an elderly parent they're trying to care for, right? I mean, there were all these issues you were coming up against. I had clients who converted their garages into an office. I had people who were standing up in the laundry room because it was the only quiet place in the house they could get work done, right? Put it on top of the
Right.
washing machine. I don't know. So
Leave.
empathy became a superpower. Those that could really lean into that, be there to understand and help get barriers out of their way. Another one was sending signals, right? Because what we noticed was out of sight, out of mind. A lot of leaders weren't talking to people. So the ones who doubled down on the communication made communication very human, right? To connect with what they were concerned about or connect with what they might be excited about. Really were winning in that episode as well. Um, and adaptability wins was another one because the leaders who were willing to be flexible, okay, so you're not going to start at 8, you're going to start at 10, but I know at 6 or 8 o'clock you'll have everything done, right? Leaning into being nimble and flexible and giving them agency over how to do their work. Um, Another one was progress over perfection, right? Nobody knew how to make
Sure.
this work in the pandemic. We were all just trying to figure stuff out. So, learning how to experiment, learning how to let people take risk, letting them know failure isn't the end of the world, that we're going to learn from it and move on. And how do we do that? And the last one was what I call the deciding factor, because what really became noticeable in the pandemic was we had to make decisions in the moment with what we knew at the time, knowing it
Right.
might not be right, it's likely to change, but I got to make a decision and move. And that was really rampant. What I heard the most was those early days of the pandemic with all the safety protocols and the office restriction, like all of that stuff, who had a vaccine card, like all of that was changing. It's so dynamically, you almost couldn't keep up with it. So you really had to be able to make those decisions with whatever you knew in the moment and move. And so those 5 things really became the leadership practices that I heard globally, different industries, different levels of leaders, different professions. It really became very consistent.
Right. There is so much there. Like the empathy piece. I love that, especially because I think like your personal and professional lives really crossed over. When
Right.
I spoke with Sal Campanier of Cushman and Wakefield, she said like her son would be like playing the piano, practicing his piano, and it's in her reading.
Yeah, right.
But it helped people connect because then their
Yeah,
child plays piano too, and I think it was a good thing to
absolutely.
mesh. And
Yeah,
you see people as people with like a lot of
that's
the
right.
same
That's
goals.
right.
There's a lot more commonality. So that's what I love about recruiting because I speak to people all over the world and I see
Mhm.
commonalities as well. People strive for the same things. It's amazing.
That's right. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun.
So tell me a little bit about your company, C3 Talent Strategies, because it sounds so interesting what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, launched my business in 2018, and I was a human resource exec. Started my career actually on the business side, so I was a underwriter, one of my first jobs. Went to
Great.
programming school, so Gary and I were in the tech field. We both understood that world, and then fell into and fell in love with teaching and training, and ultimately ended up in a company that was like a startup, even though they'd been in business for a number of years. But we hit this period of double digit growth for a decade. And it was a wild ride. And we didn't have HR when I started at that company. We had one woman doing payroll, one woman doing benefits, and an employment attorney handling employee issues. So you know how that goes.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
so we built HR from the ground up. That's where I kind of fell into it and fell in love with it. And my sweet spot always was around connecting talent and strategy. And my belief to this day is you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a workforce that's aligned, engaged, and enabled, you're going nowhere. And so that's what I do in my organization. We have 3 main verticals. We do HR strategy work, doing a lot of work around this, return to office, helping people normalize what the new office will look like and creating solutions that work for both their company, their workforce, and that they can actually achieve both, right? It's not a, yeah, it's a yes and, not an either or. I also have uh, leadership development programs that are called Leadership Incubator. That's my architecture for it. It's a digitally enabled platform where people get access to all their learning materials, and they have workbooks. They get ready for each session. There's 6 sessions over a 3-month window. And then we come together each of those sessions for what we call Power Hour. We like to call glearning. So it's group learning, group coaching, peer-to-peer coaching and facilitation. And it's different than some, traditional training environments. I'm not running a PowerPoint deck and talking at them for an hour. It's really getting them primed for the topic and having them bring what they're working on to the conversation and putting it out there for the group to help them, right? The collective wisdom of the group, and helping them find their own unique way forward. And that goes on for 6 sessions. And we have 4 different programs in Incubator. One is for Future Ready Leader, which is based on the book, those 5 leadership practices. We have one for HR leaders specifically because they've been on the front line of all this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's evolving HR. We have one for leading hybrid teams because we knew that's the new way of the world. And how do you do that effectively? And then we have one for project management in the hybrid world because that's a whole different animal. And we saw a market opportunity there. One of my colleagues is a project manager extraordinaire and a coach, and so she helps us lead those programs. And then I do
Wow,
executive
those
coaching as the
sound
third vertical.
fantastic.
Yeah,
And then that's
executive and
one on
leadership
one.
coaching. Yeah, one-on-one stuff. Yep,
And
all virtual.
mhm, right. Is there a group component to that too? For the executive
Yeah,
coaching or
we do some group coaching of its own. We
uh,
also do one-on-one coaching.
fantastic? So I was wondering what your thoughts are on how companies can like attract and retain talent in this new world.
Yeah, I think one of the first things organizations have to get really clear about is, and I have one client I'm helping actually do this at the moment, is really evaluate and re-examine what is the purpose of their office? What are they using that space for? And like Lego, how do you make it an attractive place employees want to come to instead of forcing them to? That's first and foremost, because if you don't get that right, you're going to end up on either end of that equation and end up with the either or outcome, which won't be good.
Yeah.
Because what we're noticing in the market is, the workforce expectations have totally changed. And like you described earlier, work and life harmony is what people are seeking. And they're not willing to, even that's why, these big organizations who came on really strong with their everybody back in are walking it back because employees are still not willing to do that. And they're taking a stand to say, I'll make a different choice. And that's what we're still seeing. I mean, unemployment is still in historically low levels. It's a very conflated market, right? We're seeing these tech layoffs, but yet companies are hiring for jobs they can't fill. So making sure that they create an attractive workplace, work environment, and have leaders who will treat them that way and lead that way is the magic recipe.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And being in like the tech recruitment marketplace, even though there's been some layoffs, that really hasn't changed if people want to work remote.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The hardest to fill are the clients who have 5 days in office. Those spots are really very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I have a client who works for an architectural firm, small, privately held. Um, she's had an open job. going on 2 months now, and they are fully in office. And that's the first question every candidate asks: what's your flexible work policy? And as soon as she tells them what it is, they bow out. She can't even get anybody to go through the process. And the managing
Right.
directors don't want to hear it. They're like, keep looking.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, they might just have the talent that they can find and not the talent that they really wanted in that case.
That's right.
If you have
Yeah,
to
they're
just
gonna
keep
settle.
looking,
Yeah,
they're going to,
they're going to
and
settle.
if they decide they're going to train somebody, maybe once that person is trained, they'll leave and go somewhere else.
Out.
Yeah. Out, right.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm sure you've noticed this too in the talent acquisition market. When you look at LinkedIn jobs or Indeed jobs, you'll notice now it has the title of the position and then in parentheses, hybrid, in person, remote. So we have to declare that up front because people aren't even willing to apply if it doesn't fit their needs.
you are so right. And I hadn't even thought about that because I see it as well. But I didn't make a point that like that you just made, that that's the new norm in putting
It
out a
is.
job spec.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, because they're trying to get ahead of the ones who are going to ask that question.
Right. So, Maryanne, I really appreciate your time today. Do you have a parting thought?
Yeah, I think, and I have enjoyed this conversation so much, Jodi. Thank you for having me today. I think what I would say to leaders who are listening out there is figure out what changes you may need to make to embrace this new world we're trying to normalize and figure out what's the right solution for your company, for your people, and don't be afraid to make that change. We have to learn and grow and recognize things will never be the way they were. It's been irrevocably changed. And so the sooner you come to grasp with that, the easier it will be to figure out what can work for you and what won't.
Great parting thought. So, if the listeners would like to pick up a copy of your book, and I'll say it again, The Office is Dead, Now What? A post-pandemic field guide for leadership. We are going to put a link in the show notes, so it'll be really easy to get.
Appreciate that.
So, thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tech Talent Today, brought to you by Clearmont Technologies IT Staffing and Search. You can find out more at clearmonttech.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share. See you next time.